Good evening. This is your roll call. Member Danley.
Here.
Member Fisher.
Here.
Member Miller.
Here.
Don't believe your eyes for the moment. Member Russell is absent. Member Sorensen.
Here.
Member Toll.
Here.
Chair Peters.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Well, welcome to the August 18, 2021 regular meeting of the Lake Bluff PCZBA. We've got Mr. Commissioner Toll is going to be with us remote. He has provided us with notice pursuant to employment-related responsibilities, so he will be attending virtually. He will be in the capacity of a regular commissioner. Commissioner Russell will also be attending virtually, but in a different capacity. He will be a non-voting participant, but he will be able to participate in our discussions. And we appreciate Commissioner Russell taking his time tonight and Commissioner Toll for participating virtually also.
Can I just
Yes, sure.
So, and let me just explain. Under the Open Meetings Act, you can attend remotely and be a full participating voting member, but there's only 3 qualifying reasons for that: personal illness or disability, employment purposes, or because of a family or other emergency. If somebody has another reason they're not here, vacation or personal reasons other than that, you are not permitted under the Open Meetings Act to attend virtually. So that means that Member Russell cannot vote this evening. However, nothing precludes this body from allowing somebody to participate, a member of the public or a member of the commission, from joining in via Zoom or phone or some other virtual means, but it's just a matter of not being able to cast a vote. So that's this weird anachronism, and it's the infinite wisdom of the General Assembly on how they wrote the Open Meetings Act. So that's where we're at.
Okay.
So.
No, thank you, Mr. Schuster. And then before we get to agenda item number 2, I would just like to welcome Ms. Ann Sorensen to the board. Ann's a longstanding Lake Bluff resident, been very, very active civically in the community, and it's a pleasure and honor for her to join the commission. So welcome,
Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen. All right, agenda item number 2, non-agenda items and visitors, public comment time. The board allows the public 15 minutes at the beginning of every meeting to address it and to discuss any particular questions or issues that the village may have. Anyone from the public that wishes to participate in this portion of public comment time?
Mr. Chairman, I'll note we do have this time 2 participants via Zoom. If you'd like to be recognized at the appropriate time, you have a raise hand button down there at the bottom of your screen. Again, you can speak now on an item not on tonight's agenda, or there's an opportunity to speak during each agenda item. And Mr. Chairman, I'm not seeing any requests to speak.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cole. Agenda item number 3, consideration of the July 21, 2021 PCZBA regular meeting minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I will note I had 2 members share corrections with me prior to the meeting, just typographical errors.
Okay, if you want to place those into the record, Mr. Cole.
Oh, certainly.
All right. Any other proposed revisions or other changes to the minutes from any of the commissioners? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, if we could have a roll call vote, please.
I believe you can do this
You
one
can
by
do this one by
voice.
voice.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Agenda item number 4.
Certainly. So this is a workshop for 349 East Witchwood Lane. Mike Lustig, who I believe is with us tonight, if you'd like to come on up to the podium, has requested this workshop to talk about
Not a hearing.
to talk about possible subdivision that would require some variations, some different forms of zoning relief. Because this is a workshop, because it is a bit more informal, I think it makes more sense perhaps to allow Mr. Lustig to give his presentation, and we can talk through the zoning issues after that. Essentially, this is in that category of work that procedurally might take a lot of different steps, but I think the concept is simple enough to understand what it is we're trying to do, which is we have one lot, one house, and Mr. Lustig seeks to get that to 2 lots, 2 houses, and there's different permutations, different forms that could take.
Mr. Lustig, if you want to approach the podium, please?
I'm Mimi Lustig. I was wondering if I could say a few.
Oh, if you could, yeah,
Just want to do it by the mic so we can.
do it by the mic. And-
Yeah.
Yes, and then please state your name for the record.
I'm Mimi Lustig. I'm Michael's wife. And I just wanted to say that 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, we moved to Lake Bluff. And shortly after, Michael designed and built this house. And we have, we've raised kids, we have grandkids. We've just enjoyed all of its little details that Michael designed. We've enjoyed the land immensely. And like many seniors in the area, Michael is retired now. I'm still working part-time, but I hope to retire eventually. And like many people our age, we're struggling with, can we stay in our house? And we're thinking of different options. And this option of subdividing our lot and building a small house that would reflect the character of the main house and be surrounded by the woodland and native species, and from the street view, kind of appear that it had always been there, is our objective. And we appreciate your time so very much, and we look forward to exploring this opportunity with all of you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Has anybody seen the documents that I gave Glenn last week? Are you familiar with the property? I do have a new scheme. Do you want to, is there any way to show it on a projector or?
Yeah, we can do that. Give me just a moment if you want to
But I,
give
okay.
a bit of an overview. We can have that ready for you.
So I've been following the additional or the accessory dwelling unit possibilities during the last year that I know you're considering. And originally, we thought that maybe that would be an alternative to our, to be able to stay in our house. But in looking into the economics and the livability of an additional dwelling unit scheme, it doesn't work economically, and it doesn't work for us. And so I started to look at the possibility of subdividing our property. The property is 1.6 acres on Witchwood. It was originally zoned R2, and then in 1998, the village rezoned our street to E2 and R1 across the street from us and our neighbor. So our current house is on an E1 lot, which is 71,000 square feet. The E2 bulk requires 1 acre, 43,000. So what we would like to do is to take a parcel in the front of approximately 12,000 square feet, 12,500, which would leave our parcel of 71,000 minus 43,000 required minus the 12,000 still leaves us an additional 15,000 square feet that we would just add to the existing property. We would want to create a flag lot for the existing parcel. And then the new lot would be in the front, facing Witchwood. It'd have its own driveway. And here are my goals. Number one, I'd like to minimize the size of the house. I know that usually when you're getting variances, it's to increase something or decrease a side yard. We would like to keep the side yards the way they should be, the front yard of 30 feet the way it should be, the rear yard 25 feet the way it should be. The bulk would be 12,005 in an R2 zone. A minimum area is 12,000. And the reason that I wanted to decrease the amount of land is because I would like to decrease the possible size of the house. In an R1 zone, in 20,000 square feet, there would be the ability to build a 5,600 square foot house. We have lots of possibilities with this scheme. One would be to rent the front house, live in the back house. One would be to live in the front house, rent it. The other one, sell one of the parcels. It gives us a lot of economic and living possibilities, as opposed to an additional dwelling unit, which would actually just raise our real estate taxes instead of lowering them, which is the goal here. I know there's a possibility to have an easement for the existing driveway, but I think it would be better to have the driveway be a flag lot. Similar to, there's several flag lots in the village, I'm sure you're familiar with them. One of them happens to be very close to us at 303 Briar. That was done about 20 years ago to do the exact same thing that we're proposing. And then there are several flag lots around the corner from us on Moffett. I don't know if you have the, one of the documents that I think I gave you was the zoning map of the general area. Do you have that?
Yes.
We do.
So the scheme that we would like to do has the least amount of nonconformance. In fact, it doesn't have any, the only thing that would need to be changed would be the zoning of the lot. And do you need a change, Glenn, to do a flag lot, or is that something that's, you can just do?
Yeah, so a flag lot, not uncommon in the village, but they're still sufficient as to width at the setback line. So you would still need a variation for that width.
For the driveway?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 100 feet frontage, and an R2 zone requires 75 feet, which leaves 25 feet left over, which happens to be almost exactly what our driveway and our two entry columns dimension is. Yeah, that's a good drawing. So I also have a drawing of the existing houses on the street. I don't know how you want to show this.
Yeah, we've got, we're all set up.
Oh, great.
Get your other drawing at the same time.
I'll give you the larger view.
It's the first time I'm actually using this thing. We've had it since COVID, so this is going to be an interesting test.
Oh. Wow,
Wow.
pretty good so far.
There we go.
So these are the zoning lots in our immediate area. You can see our lot. As you can see, there's quite a bit of bulk in our lot compared to most of the other lots, which is the only reason that we can actually do this, because we have the area to be able to subdivide it. But what I did was I looked at the other lots on the street to see how conforming they actually are, and I was surprised to see that most lots are non-conforming in one way or the other. The NC means non-conforming, A is non-conforming to the area. In other words, they don't have the required area for that zoning. W is the width. They don't have the required width. And S is setbacks. And then I also noted some of the flag lots in the area. If you look directly above our lot and then skip over to the blue area, the R2 zone, that's the flag lot that was created on Briar. And then there's several flag lots to the east of us off of Moffett. There's one at the bottom there and another one. I think there's a few more that I didn't note. The purple is an E2 zone that we are now. The light green is R1 that used to be R2. As I mentioned, our property used to be R2 also. The darker green is R2, and I believe the blue is R3. Correct me if I'm wrong. So to create a lot that's R2 is not out of character with well, what it used to be, and also most of the lots around it. Our lot happens to be one of the two on the street, the three, that are conforming. The lot to our right is conforming, and then the lot 2 or 3 to the left is conforming. But as I mentioned, if we do the scheme that Glenn can show you next, we would have the bulk, we would have the width for the front lot, their setbacks. So the only item that would have to be changed for the front lot would be the actual zoning itself. And then for the rear lot, you need a variance for the width, is that what you're saying, to go from 100 to 25 for the driveway?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be the only variation for that. So of all the schemes that you may have looked at, this one has the least amount of impact and the least amount of variations. It also has the least amount of impact for the building itself. Our goal, it's hard to see, but at the very bottom of the top lot, there's a curving line that goes through a tree. Do you see that? Right at the bottom of the lot line, you see that curving line that's there? That's the line that marks the difference between our front yard and the native wooded area, which extends all the way to the street. And our goal is to keep as much of the wooded area as possible. So we've done a few things. The building is L-shaped because it will have the least amount of impact on the existing native area and trees. We don't have a basement planned because a basement means that you have to dig a foundation, and the foundation cuts through the tree roots, and that kills the trees. So what we're planning is to do a scheme that I've done before on our current house and several other houses, where the foundation is a system of columns and beams, and then the building sits on top of that, so there's no harm to the existing tree roots. And we'd like to do this so that it's mandatory to keep the native area and the trees. Can I show you the elevation?
Sure. Is it the same one as in the
Yes.
packet?
Yeah.
We can do that for you.
If you're familiar with the David Adler coach houses around the corner from us on Moffett, you'll see that this sort of resembles that. And I did this for a few reasons. One, it also is in the same style as our house. Number two is that it's not very high. The allowable height in the area would be 34 feet. This would be 26 or 27 feet. And the second story is a roof, mansard roof, so that it also appears to be lower. But what I didn't show you would be the trees in the native area that would cover the front of it. If you're familiar with Witchwood, there are several of our neighbors kept the forest and woods and native area in the front. A few did not, but most have. And the houses are set back about the same as this, 30 feet. But they're not that visible due to the keeping of all the native area. That's what we would want to do also. Oh. Did I send you this?
No, this is just from,
Oh,
the.
okay,
the
good.
previous-
So on the left is our driveway. And that from the column on the left is on the property line.
Sorry about that.
And the column on the right is about 22 feet. And that's how I got to the 25 feet, which happened to be left over from we actually have 101 feet, so the new lot would be 76 feet instead of the required 75 feet. But we would want to leave what's there. The reason that the building is L-shaped is because there aren't very many trees there. And it also creates as much of a large area as possible for the existing forest. I don't know if you can see our house in the background there. We have an irregular lot. The lot in front is 101 feet, and in the back, it's 264 feet. It's a pie-shaped lot. And by the time you get to our house, I think it's about 200 feet wide would be our width of our property. So I understand that it needs to be technically 25 feet, but our setback instead of 50 feet is, I think, 119. Anyway, that curving line I was telling you about, if you can see that just south of the front yard property line, that's where the forest ends and our front yard begins. And that's what we want to keep it that way. There also happens to be a specimen ash tree that we've been saving, excuse me, for the last 20 years. And it's unbelievable, and we want to keep that tree on our property. So that's another reason why we located the property line where we did. I guess now would be the time to get your feedback.
What, can I ask, not of you, but of Glenn, what are we debating here? Or what are we discussing?
Sure. So from from the perspective of this body, this could have, it sounds like we'll have potentially 3 steps that they're not really sequential steps, but there's 3 components of relief you would need, right? So the first is a subdivision. Does it meet the standards for subdivision? Does it not? Most 2-lot subdivisions of this type don't involve infrastructure or streets or a lot of these things. But you would have to make lots that meet our zoning rules. We'll come back to that. The second is the rezoning. So this front lot, you're proposing, or I should say Mr. Lustig is proposing to move from E2 to the R2 district. That changes the lot, the minimum size, the minimum width, the yards, et cetera, et cetera. That's, where you zone property on the map, it's the same as amending the text of your zoning regulations. In fact, there's even a bit more to it, but it's a matter of legislative discretion. Mr. Schuster can talk a bit more about the criteria that go into that, but there's not definitive standards, but you're really looking at your comprehensive plan, you're looking at patterns of development in the area. It's very much a judgment-oriented exercise.
Excuse me a second, is the original house going to stay E2 or is that going to be R2?
I believe it's proposed to stay E2. Okay. And then the third and final part is when we do a subdivision, it's a little misleading to think of it as moving lines. I mean, I would compare it to an Etch-a-Sketch, right? You shake up all the lines, you start over. And so the end result needs to have, you either need to be conforming in everything you're creating, or you need variations. In this case, at least from a surface look, you have at least one variation, which is the lot width for that back lot. You're making a flag lot. By our code, it's only 25 feet wide. It would need to be 100 feet wide. And so you'll need at least one variation. Before we kept going, you know, we would analyze the property, and there may or may not be a need for others. This is a fairly large property. I'd be surprised if other variations were required, but that would come with a full submittal.
So where is that 25 versus 100 on that lots, on the scheme there?
Yeah, if you look right here, you can see,
Oh, I see.
zoom in a little bit.
Oh, I see, okay.
And if you look at the first page of the memorandum, I'm not sure I can look
Oh,
at
in
it.
R2, that should be 100 feet?
75 in R2. That's-
Yes, sorry, 75 in R2. Or no, so that's the E2 lot, so that would actually be, the left-hand lot is the R2 lot. It's supposed to be 75, it is 75. The right-hand lot, which is really the back lot, is supposed to be I might have had a typo here. I believe it's 100. I think your memo might show 125, but a substantially wider lot at the street line.
But it's in the back of the house. I mean, it's in the back of the,
Yeah, if you were back here, this moves. So back here at this 135-foot width, that would be conforming. It's really the pole of the flag that makes it a non-conforming lot that would need a variation.
okay. Thank you.
I'll make a comment or two. I'd like to thank Mr. Lustig for coming in and providing us with many resources to discuss. I think, you know, providing this body with schematics, options, et cetera, is always helpful when we're discussing it. I do have a couple concerns. One, looking at the minutes from 1999, it looks like Mr. Lustig kind of led the charge to have it rezoned as an E2 to begin with. So in addition to a petition with 18 signatures. So I've got two questions, Mr. Lustig. One is, I understand that your personal economics have changed in the last 22 years. But has there been a significant change to the neighborhood as well that would allow for other owners to subdivide?
Well, let's see. First of all, I didn't lead the charge. I was asked to coordinate it by one of our neighbors and then eventually by the village engineer, because I had a lot of experience with zoning matters in Chicago. We went before this board, and we talked about the issue of two lots being able to be subdivided into 3 lots. That was the problem down the street that we were addressing. It wasn't so much about bulk, it was more about the fact that we would have houses that were 5 feet away from each other. And at the time, our lot was one of the only conforming lots. I did ask at the time if in the future we could subdivide our lot, and the answer was yes, you could. In terms of the way that the neighborhood has changed, it's actually sort of, I wouldn't say backfired on us, but changing the lots across the street from R2 to R1 has made it so that the houses could be bigger. We just had 2 renovations across the street from us where they added on bulk. But I think your question was, well, in terms of the economics, our real estate taxes have almost quadrupled since the time we moved in. And it's, as you know, Illinois has the highest real estate taxes in the country. We have among the highest real estate taxes in the state. And as you all know, it's hard for seniors to not have to leave their houses. We just had some good friends across the street from us who moved because of real estate taxes. And it's a real issue when you get to be 70 years old and you want to stay in your house. So, yes, the economics have changed a lot since 1992 and 1998 when we rezoned it. But the character of the neighborhood, yes, I guess it's changed, sure.
Okay, thank you. And then one other question, in that rezoning process, at least in the minutes, it says that there were 18 neighbors who were in favor of the rezoning. Have they had any input on your current request?
I haven't talked, well, a lot of them are no longer here. Our neighbor to the right is no longer here. I think our neighbor across the street is here. I can't think, oh, and the Munders are here. So there's only 2 or 3 out of the 18 that are still here.
Well, I understand that maybe the neighbors have changed since then, but it seems like there was a coordinated effort back then. I would hope that we'd get some input from the neighbors on another rezoning.
Well, back then we changed, back then we rezoned it as a bulk with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 24 lots. Here we're only asking to subdivide 1. But I can certainly, talk to my neighbors. I think it would be better to get some input as to which scheme is preferable before I do that.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have, George, what are your comments?
Glenn, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Is everyone, because I'm having a lot of trouble. I've got my volume all the way up and I'm having trouble following the conversation. But if you can hear me, I'll share my thoughts right now. I was the village engineer back when East Witchwood, this area of East Witchwood was rezoned. I think it's important for all the members to understand that the rezoning absolutely occurred at the request of all of the owners of the properties that were rezoned, because the neighbors were not wanting their larger lots to be subdivided, and many of them could be subdivided if the zoning stayed at the R2 that it was back in the early 1990s and prior. I know I find myself very concerned about this particular proposal because the village has historically, except in extremely unique circumstances, has not permitted flag lots. If we permit this particular proposal to go forward, I don't know what the logic would be to telling other people that they cannot now stack 2 houses on either one lot or create what's really known as a spot zoning. If that R2 lot was created in the middle of the E2 zone with R1 across the street, that would be something extremely unique to create this small lot. And I would like to correct one statement that Mr. Lustig made. He indicated that because the properties on the north side of East Witchwood were rezoned from R2 to R1, that it actually resulted in larger homes, and that's not really true at all. The lots have all remained the same size, and our zoning calculations are based on lot size. So just to clarify that for everyone. But I'm very, very concerned. There's dozens and dozens of properties in the area and in the village that if we allow this proposal to go forward, I just don't understand why we would allow it for one and not for others. It would really change the aesthetic on that street to suddenly have a home on the south side of East Witchwood there that was so far forward of any of the other homes. So I find myself extremely concerned with this proposal.
So when you say that this lot would be, the house would be closer to the street than most of the other houses, if you look at the houses on the south side, I think you'll see that the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses are the same distance back from, that we're proposing. Number 2, do we need to create a flag lot, Glenn? Can this be just an R1 zone, contiguous to other R1 zones, and then the back lot would have an easement for their driveway?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So our, some towns do have zoning codes that consider these, it's not a term of art, but I'll call it a tandem lot arrangement, right? So you have a lot in the back, you have a lot in the front, you have a driveway easement. For example, I believe if you're in, don't quote me on this, I think you're in Lake Forest, that the area of that driveway easement would be excluded from your yards. It might affect your floor area and so on. Our codes don't work like that. If you were to allow that situation, that effectively creates, that's yards and bulk for the forward house, and that's at the expense. When you create a flag lot, essentially that pole is essentially unbuildable. It still works towards the bulk of the rear house, but just doesn't change the form quite as much. Our code doesn't really anticipate that easement arrangement would be built. It does exist in some parts of town. Up in Crabtree Farms, I think you could find a couple examples, but it's flag lots are rare. This driveway easement situation is rarer, at least in my knowledge of the town.
So to address George's comments, if we made it an R1 zone, which is one of the options I gave you, it could be 20,000 square feet, it could be reduced to 15,000 square feet, but it would still be R1. The frontage would still be 100 feet, which is required. They would give an easement to the rear yard, which would have a front yard of 150 feet, since it's in a regular lot. And there wouldn't be the need to be any flag lots. But there are so many flag lots in Lake Bluff. So George, I don't understand your comment about why it would be bad to have another one.
Mr. Lustig, I disagree with you. There aren't a lot of flag lots in Lake Bluff. And the ones that have been created in the 30 years that I've been associated with the village were done so only under extremely unique circumstances. Whether your lot in the front there that you're proposing would be rezoned R1 or R2, I'm just philosophically opposed and think would not be a good thing for the village to start allowing second homes. And you're proposing, is at least as I understood your submittal, a 4,000 square foot home, which is a sizable home in the front of your existing residence. And I mean, no matter how the semantics may change, but in essence, you're either creating a flag lot for your existing property, severely deficient in terms of lot frontage required along the road, or if you just grant an easement, you're basically asking for, I guess, as I understand it, zero frontage. It's just that the concept of placing and allowing for the construction of a second home in front of an existing home and asking for a substantial variation from lot frontage. It is a situation that if an analysis was done of all the lots in the village, I guarantee you we'd find that there are many, many lots that would then, if we allowed this for your property, I don't know why we would then not allow it for someone else. I just think it's bad. It's a road that we don't want to go down. And that's just my opinion.
Well, I have 2 comments. Number 1, maybe it is a good idea to start allowing these so that more people can stay here and don't have to sell their houses. maybe it's a good idea to have some density if it doesn't really impact anything, guys, because I don't think what we're proposing impacts anything. Number two, if you look at the map, you'll see that the house next to us was not rezoned to E2. And let me give you the history of that. The Planning Commission voted to zone the entire street, our E2. And at the village meeting where it was approved, our neighbor came with his lawyer and said that he didn't want to do that. He wanted the ability to subdivide his lot because he had a contract with Jeff Lynch to sell his property and have it subdivided. And so the village board said, okay, you don't have to go along with this. You can subdivide your lot. This is the house directly next to us. That lot has the ability to be subdivided because he didn't want to go along with it. So when you say that you don't want to have lots subdivided, you already gave our neighbor the permission to do the same exact thing at that rezoning.
Yeah, I don't want to get into a one-on-one debate, but just to clarify, the zoning that was already in place allowed that neighbor, if he chose to move forward, to create 2 lots, and you were opposed to it. And Mr. Lustig, I know you were opposed. You were back then. You were very fearful about other property owners moving forward because of some of the large lots on East Witchwood and creating 2 lots or 3 lots out of 2, whatever the situation would be. The village did not want to downzone someone's property if they weren't in agreement with it. That's why they let that one homeowner retain his existing zoning. All the nonconformities, for the most part, that were created on that street the nonconformities were created as a result of all of the other neighbors wanting the change in zoning to either E2 on the south side or R1, because they did not want the further subdivision of property and more homes constructed in that area. So, it's now 25 years later, but just once again, and I won't comment any further, let other members talk, but I'm to start allowing flag lot construction is going to substantially increase the density. I know you're talking about specific methods of construction that might save some tree roots, but when a 4,000 square foot home is constructed, there is substantial damage to existing wooded lots. You just cannot avoid it. It's impossible. There's too big of a footprint of disturbance. All the utility lines have to be constructed. So it's just something that I don't think is good for the village.
Well, and I know you felt that way back in 1998 because after my neighbors decided to drop the rezoning, you came to me and said, there's a house down the street that's about to be sold. They're going to do the same thing. We need to stop this. And then we started the process again on your request.
That's not correct, but so be it.
Mr. Lustig, one of the initial reactions that I had when I went through the paperwork was the potential impact to the streetscape. I mean, you mentioned the houses to your, that would be the west, I guess. But when I look at the 3 or 4 houses to your immediate west, they're set back almost as far as your house is.
Yes,
So
that's
how do
true.
you address the streetscape impact or potential streetscape impact?
Well, 2 things. First of all, I think that the houses next to us, their view would not be changed at all with our house there. And, now they're looking at a forest and, now then they'll be looking at a forest with a house in it. But if you look at the houses across the street, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 houses across the street that are equal to 30 feet or less than 30 feet. So it certainly doesn't impact the character of that. And yes, the 3 houses next to us, well, the one to our right, there could be next year, there could be a house right 30 feet from the, if they choose to subdivide that. And then there's the 5 or 6 houses at the other end of the street that are also 30 feet. So I think it stays in the same character.
And as you responded to Commissioner Towle, no dialogue yet with any of the neighbors. You haven't raised this with your.
Not
immediate
yet,
neighbor.
because I wanted to see, I gave, as you know, I gave you 6 schemes, all of which have different zoning, and I wasn't sure what the criteria would be for rezoning it. So I wanted to wait until after I spoke to you. I spoke to one neighbor who lives down the street about it, and he was encouraging it. But I haven't talked to anybody yet, but I will.
Thank you.
Is that a criteria?
It's not a formal criteria, but if there would be a public hearing, there would notice that would go out to the neighborhood. And I would hope that, or we always hope that the neighbors engage on any sort of petition. And obviously the rights, property rights of neighbors have to be addressed also.
Does anybody else have the same concerns that George has?
Well, I'm not,
I certainly do have the same concerns that George has, and I would absolutely disagree with you in that I think it does incredibly change the streetscape and just the character of that particular neighborhood. I mean, one of the great things about Witchwood is how wooded it is, and I know you claim that it will remain wooded even if you were to build this second home, but to have a second building that large, that close to the street on that part of Witchwood, I believe would be very disruptive.
It's approximately the same size as the houses across the street from us,
Understood.
if not smaller.
any other comments from the commissioners?
I'd just like to say, I understand the hardship we're all facing. Taxes are getting higher. We all want to live here. We're getting older. Times changed from 20 years ago to now. Like, I think what your story and what you've built in the past is very beautiful. You've given us a lovely home to look at through the years. Really appreciate that. I am concerned about the density, and I'm concerned about your setback and being part of that neighborhood and being a part of Witchwood and how so many houses are far back off the street and to sort of all of a sudden sort of block that flow. I'm surrounded by 2 flag lots. I'm in East Lake Prospect, and I've watched a neighbor tear down a lot of trees recently to put up a pickleball basketball court, and it breaks your heart because you think you're going to save all these trees, and we need to sit down as a community and try to think about what we can do to put back the trees that are taken down. That's another issue and another topic, but you are going to be removing quite a bit. And I guess my thing to question this is you've got a lot of roadblocks, and I think there's a lot of issues that you're facing. And yes, you gave us 6 different plans, and perhaps one could be highlighted more than others, and we can continue having that discussion. But another idea is consider going smaller, setting back more. You've really pushed that 4,000 square foot home up to the road, and just looking at that sight line for everything else, and knowing that the trees would come down and it will have a whole different feeling. That to me is a concern.
So
But-
what if we set it back further than 30 feet and reduced it to the 4,000 square feet? We have no problem with that.
Right, and that was my first thing when thinking about it is, what about an ADU? And I know you're saying that 'cause that's another topic that we've been talking about, because I thought, this is perfect, here we go, an ADU, but I know that we're gonna have some regulations there. We haven't even come to a policy yet on that.
Oh, can I point out one other thing?
Yeah.
If the ADU goes through, we would be allowed to build without any variances, almost the exact same building that we're proposing.
I don't think so.
Well,
No.
we'll.
There's going to be maximum caps, correct, on any ADUs.
Yeah, but the maximum is gonna be 1,500 square feet. But you don't have a height restriction.
Yeah, we do.
Because you wanted to I thought you wanted to do away with the height restriction so that people could build units on top of their garages.
There's definitely a height restriction going to be in the ADU.
What would the height restriction be for the ADU here?
I'm not sure of where we're at right now in our
finalized it yet.
discussions, but definitely the height of an ADU is a critical factor.
So to fill in the gap here a bit as I pull this up. So originally, the drafting thought was to let the village's existing bulk rules control height, control things of that nature. And so in most districts, in most of our traditional residential districts, including this one, a detached accessory structure wouldn't be able to be taller than 17 feet or the height of the principal building. For a while there, the draft included a provision that with certain circumstances will let you go a bit taller to accommodate the situation you just described. You have a garage and you have an ADU, and can we make a very limited exception that makes that very traditional form of an ADU possible? And we were directed to eliminate that exception a few months back, and just in view of proximity to the adjoining lot lines and the height and creating structures that don't exist in the village today. Similarly, there have been different permutations on size. I think in this district, we did have a draft that was relatively permissive, looking at, again, that 1,500 square foot range earlier on. Still, that would have to meet your overall bulk requirements. So you'd have a 4-area limit for the whole lot. And you'd also have a ratio between the accessory and the principal, in your case, front and back. Going into our last meeting, we were directed to reduce that down as well, based on some of the available bulk in the E1 and E2 districts in the south of town. So that's gone from 1,500, which would be difficult to realize on some lots. Our current draft calls for that at 800. So substantially smaller, in part because of that size-scale relationship concern.
So the new regulation for the accessory dwelling unit in an E2 zone will be no more than 800 square feet?
That's the draft right now. As I've just described, it's been moving backward and forward.
Oh, because I was going to point out that at 1,500 square feet, if you look at our front elevation and you look at even the height restriction of 17 feet, which ours could be, the building from the street would look exactly the same as what we're proposing. But if it's 800 square feet, that might not be true. But if we do decide to do an additional dwelling unit, we're still going to have a building there in the same place with the same amount of trees being taken down, and the same impact on the street that people are objecting to. And so if that's the case, why not just allow something that makes more sense? George?
Well, I'm not sure that you would have, the impact would be much less with the proposed ADU of 800 square feet or whatever than your proposed housing size. The impact on the environment with an 800 square foot ADU should be much less than what we're looking at right now. So I think it would be a dramatically different scenario and a dramatically different impact.
Yeah, I just meant the front elevation, because we could accommodate 800 square feet here. Our current plan goes back this way, but it doesn't, if it were an ADU, that part would be missing. You'd still have those.
Well, I think we're still working our way through the drafts of the proposed ADU regulation, and there's still a fair amount of work to be done. But I anticipate that it'll still be subject to a rather rigorous in most cases, special use permit review, but we're not quite there yet.
So does anyone have any other thoughts on how this could be, how we could build something? What kind of setback or bulk or easement or whatever would have to be changed to make it so that it would be palatable for you?
I think my only concern was, or my biggest concern, I guess, was driving the street multiple times, looking from the west, when you start on the west, let's say from, Vincent or something, or come over, cut around that way, Oak, I guess. You're right, the houses are quite close to the front, so I was thinking, oh, that's not really that dramatically different. But then you get to that whole series of houses that are set so far back, and I think that really is what's so unique there. So then it did seem like it would be very jarring, because I think that south side of Witchwood is distinct from the north side of Witchwood. You're right, the north side is much closer, but it's still pretty different. So then I was even thinking, okay, well, so let's say that the 409 Witchwood could be subdivided. I think by right it probably can. But because it's on that curve, I don't think the impact is as great there. I think that would be minimized in a sense. I don't think it makes it, in my opinion anyway, I don't think visually it's going to be as challenging as having this right there on the road. So, I was thinking, okay, well, if do you need 4,300? Can it be shrunk down to 23? I don't know what the magic numbers are, and I don't know whether visually that's still going to make a difference. I hadn't really thought of the flag lot. I know flag lots are a challenge in this town. I don't know how many additional ones that would open up. I think there's a lot of challenges with just having the driveway easement, because then the smaller lot in the front gets the value, in a sense, of bulk. You might not be the one adding that bulk today, but you could sell it 10 years from now or 5 years from now, and somebody else says, oh, but I've got all this bulk because that's the way our rules are, as opposed to the way our rules are for flag lots. So I think there's just challenges, and I don't have a solution to what would be a better way to do this, but I think that's my view of challenges anyway.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Any other comments from the commissioners?
I think if you are going to proceed and have a formal request to this committee, we started out reading the minutes from 1999, which was brought up at the beginning, and you came to this committee with 16 positive responses to convert the zoning to E2. If you are seriously thinking about it, I would go back to your neighbors and see if you still get the same unanimous response to be able to convert from E2 to R2. And maybe that'd be a good starting point for us to consider this in light of the objections that have been brought up by this.
Okay, I will. Thank you. Anybody else have any comments?
I don't believe so, Mr. Lester.
Okay, thank you for your time, appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now the famous ADUs.
Agenda item number 5, accessory dwelling unit workshop. I don't know if you need much of a
I'd like
prefatory
to,
comment, Glenn?
before we start, I was always objecting to like a special permit for this. Or I was thinking about objecting, but maybe this should be a special permit based on our conversations just now.
Oh, yeah.
These
Yeah,
ADUs.
right.
I
No, I
thought
wasn't-
that as well.
Yeah, because we were thinking, if they meet the criteria, why need a special permit? But maybe there's always the exceptions. Anyway, that's just a thought.
Yeah. It's a lot to, for my first meeting, it's a lot to put together, because this proposal is quite different, I think, for our streetscape on Witchwood. But in comparison to the ADU considerations,
I don't feel like I'm ready to offer advice on this because this is still very much in process. And this particular idea is quite much more bold than I would perceive others might be along the way. So, to be determined.
Yeah.
No, I think we had an excellent dialogue, and everybody expressed their preliminary thoughts and opinions, and we provided whatever sort of guidance that we could. So, ADUs.
Certainly. So I hope the memo was somewhat self-explanatory, very perfunctory open remarks. We've heard the concerns about form. We're trying to give you options. If you were with us for our discussions about the Rio district, we hit a similar point at a point, at a stage in our discussion where we've got these competing demands. It's hard to find a perfect policy solution. There's uncertainty, and we've just tried to open the doors up and give you some alternatives. So the first alternative takes the framework you have. It's as of right development. It dials the scale in fairly tight. As far as, you could go smaller. I think it's very unlikely these units would be built very often if you go too much smaller than this. We could look at how to really dial in that number, but you're on the small side of what many regulations allow. Bearing in mind there's different forms, the diesel still have to meet bulk, et cetera, et cetera. And the second option we've given you is essentially the special use permit process. And we've talked about the advantages and the disadvantages of that. I will say, and I hope it's not too opaque in the draft, that we've really, as much as we can, we've tried to streamline that process, right? We've tried to find ways, as the saying goes, to have your cake and to eat it too. We really have here policy statements about, just in saying that, we know a residential use in a residential district is really a special use if you think about it right. There are homes, people are living in them. We're not really looking at all the criteria about special uses, right? We're not talking about traffic or utilities or et cetera, et cetera. It's a little bit of a different creature. And so what we've framed up here, really on page 4 going into page 5 is just the essential part. We say you're doing an accessory dwelling unit. We're presuming that you, as a policy matter, we're presuming you meet these standards. If there was something egregious, someone could raise the point. But what we're really just going to look at is, from a site plan perspective, are you creating good distance between the ADU and other dwellings? Are you creating good privacy for your neighbors? Are you minimizing the visual impact to your neighbors? And is the scale something that's just clearly subordinate to the principal dwelling unit? And we really want to make sure that conversation's focused there to reduce uncertainty to the applicant, to guide your deliberations as the PCZBA, to really reflect much of the substance of where your concerns have been, and also keep incorporating a lot of the work you've done on trying to crack this size issue. This is also framed up in a way that, sort of the two asterisks on this. One, the village's general policy position is that it doesn't want to be in the business of architectural design review. Could that change one day? I'm not sure, but this policy is consistent with that. You're looking at this with a zoning lens, not a design lens. And the second is just a statement that this board would look at this compared to a residential addition, right? We want to have, you should consider the extent to which you have parity between this type of unit and a regular addition, bearing in mind that it's very easy to build an addition or to tear down a house and build a new house. And you want to be mindful of the differences in difficulty, the differences in risk borne by different parties. So I hope that makes sense. I'll stop talking now. And again, just trying to give you, you all solutions that we can work with. I guess I won't stop talking. The one last thing I'll say, forgive me, is if there are continued concerns about bulk, we've retained professional help. We've given you some case studies. We can keep looking at ways to do that, but it would be hard to continue to retain those resources. Going down the special use permit path gives you guidelines, probably is a more productive path forward than continuing to study different bulk options. But again, we're happy to look at ways to facilitate either path.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Cole, and thank you for all the hard work that you put in, and there'll still be a little more work to do after we finish up our work tonight. But I don't know whether we reached the consensus. I know several of us have been almost, we take the position that a special use permit should be the approach, at least at this point in time. And I'm not sure that all the commissioners share that belief. I know several do. But maybe we should get a consensus as to where we stand on permission as of right vis-a-vis special use, and then focus on the document that addresses that scenario. So,
I'd like to start out. This is very good that you included in the packet, the Chicago Metropolitan Area. There's some very good thoughts in there. And I starred 3 of them.
I should mention, I didn't know we were published in anything. So this came as a surprise to me, but
We're cutting
enjoyable.
edge.
Yeah.
We're famous.
The paragraph about the occupancy is very important. I think doing these ADUs is very important for this time, this age. Basically, from the comments we heard from the petitioner, and yes, we want to keep people in Lake Bluff, and yes, we want to make these units as affordable as possible. So I think it's important we proceed with ADUs and get this done with. Number 2 was the parking issue. In the guideline, there's nothing says about parking. Now, I think we need to address parking as an issue in this, because people can't park in the street in the middle of winter. And
They can't park in the street at any time, actually.
well, yeah, they can, and from
Overnight
April
parking would
1st
be,
through April 1st through November 11th, you can. You can park, except east of Moffett.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Okay, so you can, but not after mid-November. So we have to address the parking issue, and there should be a parking place, I think, for every ADU, or at least accommodated by the primary residence, and should be included in the guidelines. And then, as far as my concern about the special use, I was against it. After tonight's presentation, I am thoroughly, totally, entirely, and every other adjective I can use for it. For unattached, for detached dwellings. I think it's very important, especially in the CE districts and so forth, because they could build monstrosities in those areas, and as we saw tonight, could affect the neighborhood. But I think you put it as a streamlined process, I think we should make the process a lot simpler and less costly than a typical special use permit. Somehow, and that'll leave to the administration to address that. Something else to do. And that's my opening comments.
yeah, thank you, Member Miller. Member Toll.
Sorry for my absence. I'm at the whim of our residents and visitors tonight. So I think in the last meeting, my comments were in favor of a special use. And I think at least starting out, getting our feet wet, I think a special use is appropriate for this. I also made the comment last meeting that there have been several times since I've been active with the village that we have started out with a special use and then gone to a permitted process. And I think that would work really well for something new for us, such as ADUs. Having said that, I think Member Miller's idea about requiring a parking spot, at least one per ADU, or perhaps even one per bedroom in an ADU, makes sense. We always have parking issues, it seems like, whether it's in our uptown business district or otherwise, or at the beach, or I would hate to create an additional parking issue for the neighborhoods that may have ADUs. I think I like the updates to the guidelines. I think we've really nailed down some good requirements. I'm relatively new to this conversation, but I think just in the 2 meetings that I've been involved with on this, I think we've made some really good progress.
Thank you, Member Tall. Member Russell dropped out?
It certainly appears to be that way, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, it's just great that he was able to participate for the first hour or so tonight. Member Sorensen, we'll put you on the spot.
Awesome. Well, 2 of you who have spoken already have teed this up very nicely for me, because I just went through my orientation yesterday and came back with more questions today. I've been reading, apparently I need to go back and read the last 2 years' worth of these conversations in my spare time. So regardless of that, I also have certainly a sense of parking. In some manner, there should be at least one space. We can't get around the fact that we will still have winter, and people have cars. We are not a fully walkable, as much as we've been walking through the last year and a half, we're not a fully walkable community yet. I also, my gut was to lean toward a special use initially, and I think this evening's conversation has also made me feel that, at least for the first sort of piloting of this, we should have that at our disposal to see what sort of factors come up that we are not anticipating at this moment. And one thing that I had mentioned, I don't know how much this, well, I don't know if this can even be accommodated, but my perspective coming in from outside is that ADUs in part are to help create spaces for people to age gracefully. So there are accessibility or, Glenn, the word is visibility issues?
Visitability.
Visitability, there was another consonant in there. So those are potentials, and maybe it's simply not realistic to hope for that fully.
Can you explain that?
Yes, so accessibility in that as people are aging or people have disabilities, that they can access on the same level, have access to kitchen, bathroom, bedroom on the first floor without needing stairs, larger spaces to age into.
Was that a criteria we want to put into these? It's really a private dwelling.
It is, so I realize that my perspective on that may be inappropriate, considering that we are the village of Lake Bluff, not a different place where that might be more manageable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think that those are the things rattling in my mind right now.
Oh, thank you for those preliminary comments. That's great. Member Fisher?
I also was one who was for having these be by right in certain districts at least, and I guess today's conversation also is making me lean towards special use, at least as a pilot, until we get the kinks out of it, as several of you have said. I do think that parking just one, my gut is one per ADU. I don't think we have to do more than that. I wonder, last time I think there was a conversation, and I think Member Toll mentioned it, about perhaps considering lot size versus, EU or E2 or R1 or whatever. I don't know, did that just fall by the wayside? Did I miss? We were talking about in terms of the size, I think, that maybe it was dependent upon the lot size. Did that just fall away, or did I miss that one?
I'm not sure it fell away necessarily, but it seems to me that something like that could be addressed in a special use.
Okay, so
permit
when, just
application.
again, even though it's gonna be special use, I think the more guidance we can give, the better the clarity. Same thing with ownership, we kind of had the conversations about, is this just for family, or is it for, even if the owner is in one of them, can there be someone who is not family in the other one? I do think that that's kind of the original intent, was to broaden our base of people, but again, if that needs to be talked about at some point. And I admit, I wasn't really thinking of an ADU, an ADU in front of a property. That today was kind of, or this whole request that came through originally was kind of surprising. That, I hadn't, in my mind, it was always in the back and more shielded, and now it obviously can very much be in the front. And is that okay? Is that fine? Is that anything we need to? But again, I suppose that could just be addressed in the special use also. So those are the only questions that I kind of had, I think.
No, that's an excellent point. I think the dialogue we had earlier this evening certainly was enlightening and raised some
It was.
additional questions. Because one of our concerns, or at least one of my concerns all along, has been that unintended consequence that,
Right.
and you won't know until it happens.
Yeah.
So I think we made a lot of progress tonight just on the ancillary issue.
On Member Fisher's comment about family and principal dwelling, in F3, regulations for all rentals where the principal dwelling is leased or not occupied by the owner, the accessory dwelling unit must be occupied by the owner. So that takes care of one question. But the number 2, occupants, it kind of contradicts it. Occupants of the principal and accessory dwelling unit must constitute a single family.
Right, so
Kind
that's
of
where,
contradicts it.
yeah, I was confused. And also in the little cheat sheet here, there were different, some of the cities had family ownership only and some didn't. So, obviously you can create whatever you feel is appropriate.
And I think, an owner should be in one of the dwellings, but I don't think an owner or a relative has to be in the other dwelling.
I concur.
I agree.
Now, does that eliminate if it is rented, then it can only be rented in entirety? It cannot be rented to two separate families, let's say? I know that was part of the discussion last meeting.
So that, if this helps add clarity, that F3 Roman numeral 2, you need that for the situation Member Toll's describing, right? So ordinarily, if you have an accessory dwelling unit and you have to have the owner live in the ADU or the dwelling unit, well now, can you not lease the house? Question mark?
Right.
So that's what that exception is there for.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah.
All right, that makes more sense now.
Okay.
So it doesn't, as long as they're the same family lives in both units, if they're leasing it, that's still okay, even though they're not the principal owner, yeah.
Yeah, the goal is just to keep, an owner from leasing the house to one party and the ADU to another.
Okay. Can we add that to the language that says if the house is occupied by a non-owner, that the ADU must have a family member in it, something like that? Just change the language, so it's a little clearer.
I think we could find something like that.
Yeah,
that
we
works,
can tweak language. The one reminder, and let me pull it up, is also our definition of family. So I just want to make sure that we all understand what that means, because it's a fairly broad definition. So family, we define in our code as one person or two or more persons related by blood, marriage, legal adoption, or guardianship, but not including guardianship by any governmental or quasi-governmental agency, or not more than four persons not so related,
What does that mean?
at least one of whom is an adult resident who is domiciled in the dwelling unit and is capable of, and in fact, functioning as the head of the household together with domestic servants and temporary gratuitous guests living together as a single housekeeping unit. So the key with the family definition, and this is something that has transformed over time in all communities. We used to think of it, oh, it's a family related by blood or marriage. But there are also family units of people who are not legally married.
Right.
And our definitions of family have so changed. So the key is not more than four persons not so related living together as a single housekeeping unit. So you couldn't have 8, people just hanging out in a house, running it all together. Think of everybody graduates from college and they want to bring the frat house here. But if you had a situation where 4 people wanted to live together unrelated, so long as they're operating as a family unit together, it constitutes a family. Now, what does it mean in our code to be a single housekeeping unit? They're cooking together, they take out the garbage together, they do, share living space together. They're not 4 independent units, but they're, 4 people living together communally. And we do allow that as family. So if we're using the definition of family for the ADUs, do understand that it's definitely broader than what we think of as just either a married couple, and grandmother, or they're a couple living in a house and then the ADU is their son. So there is some leeway there, but so I just
But 4 is the limit for this.
for the family,
For
right?
unrelated people who call themselves a
It's just,
family.
it seems so difficult, though, to feel that we can go around and police that and
And we
enforce it in a
don't.
way that,
And we don't go around looking, but what happens is if there's a complaint, and think of, I have a great, frat house experience
right,
at college, and we all decide to live together and create a frat house here, the neighbors may complain when there's 7 of us living in the house, and then the village would get a complaint, and then the village could look at it and say, okay, we have an issue here. It doesn't meet the definition of family. Now, to my knowledge, since I've represented the village, I don't ever remember this ever coming up in terms of a complaint. It also helps in this community, home prices are higher. There's not a lot of transient rentals. In college towns and in other places, it becomes much more of an issue where there's housing stock, where you get a bunch of people living together. So, I don't think it's a huge issue. Just understand that nuance of the code, because it does impact how we write the ADU section.
If we added the word single-family unit, does that clarify it for people? But that's a really.
Is that the
silly-
same description?
Yeah, we call it housekeeping unit, single housekeeping unit.
Maybe we should
Okay.
convert it to that.
Would it be simpler to just eliminate that completely and only allow rental of the ADU if the owner occupies the primary structure? And would that give anybody heartache?
So the way it's written right now, and I guess the way that I'm reading it, is if you look at that section 3, where the principal dwelling is leased or not occupied by the owner, so the owner's not in the main house, either the owner has to be in the accessory dwelling unit, okay, or the occupants of the principal and accessory dwelling unit must constitute a single family. The idea there, I think when we drafted this, was you could rent out the principal structure, and those tenants could have grandma living in the ADU. They could have, the tenants could have their kids who come home from college living in the ADU.
So, I mean, it makes
And-
sense that when you put it
And-
that way.
Right, and the idea is, again, it goes back to that housekeeping unit is the concept. So it's not that the tenant can just rent it to anybody. They just find a stranger, off the internet and say, got a room for rent in the pool house or above the garage, come take it. What we would say is if it's a tenant in the main house, there has to be some sort of relationship with the person in the ADU, either by blood, marriage, or it might be they're living as a housekeeping unit, meaning, yeah, it's my friend from college, but we do everything together. He's doing his laundry in our house. Think of, the TV show Full House, where it's a giant family of people all living together communally. That's the concept.
That makes sense.
So, yeah.
Member Danley.
Oh, gosh, I think the alternate A by right has been streamlined, and, we were all worried about the bulk and heights, and I felt like this ordinance brought forward has done a nice idea. I am concerned about the, what we heard today, but I feel like streamlining, is there really such a word as streamlining a special use? Because it just seems that there's such the hardship on that, and I feel like alternate A as a pilot program, or bring that out to the community and get feedback before we really go forward with something. Is that even possible? It'd be nice to hear what people have to say, perhaps. And I know we have a couple options or ADU opportunities perhaps coming forward. So I'm in favor of doing something, and I feel that we're hearing more and more the hardships of even living in town, and we just don't have a lot of options. And our taxes are going hard, and we're going to start losing the older population, and that would be really difficult. So I would like to, I'm hesitant to think that we can really streamline a special use. I really like this ordinance in front of us with alternate A. I feel like we really have toned it in, and, I remember when that architect was there and created that three-dimensional sort of, cube of where it stands, and I think we've done a nice job in sort of bringing it forward. But I like the idea of a pilot program that maybe then we could, loosen up the belt buckle a bit if we feel that we've gone too much and we don't even have any interest. But that's my feeling.
Yeah, thank you, Member Danley.
Can we do a streamline?
Yeah, so I wrote down a couple of notes. I'll respond to that, and also some comments that you raised and one other I heard. So speed of the process, streamlining the process. There are ways to make it faster. One of which, and I'm not saying that this is good or bad policy, that's above my pay grade, and that's up to all of you. But one way to do it is cut out the village board. And we do that with certain types of variations, where there are some variations where this is an approving body, and there are some where it's not in your recommending body. You make the recommendation, and then it goes to the village board. So one option would be to say that they come before you, but you are the one who has the authority to issue the approval, and then you don't go through that extra step of a village board. From a timing perspective, that's really the fastest way that I think of off the top of my head, and I can continue to brainstorm, but to speed up that process. The other, which is the cost, and Member Miller, you brought up the cost of going through this process. So understand that, when you build an ADU, I see the several categories of costs. So the architecture costs that you're gonna bear, an engineering cost to design it, bring up plans, and you have to bring that to this body as part of an application. There can be significant cost in that. There's an application fee for a special use. If you are an applicant and you may wanna hire an attorney, particularly if you're not sophisticated, the applicant here earlier tonight was an architect and been through the process. but for some, they will want to hire an attorney to help them go through the process at a cost. Village attorney cost. So my cost, so oftentimes what we will do is have the applicants reimburse the village for the legal work that we end up doing. So we write an ordinance, and there's costs. It's not huge. You know, if it's a special use, if it's an hour or 2 hours of time, you know, it's a few $100s. Then you get, after we get the zoning approval, then there's the building permit fees. So in terms of cost, and of ways in which to lessen the cost, you can talk about lowering application fees, though application fees aren't huge. Credits on, you know, in discounting building permit fees. I mean, there's drawbacks to all of these things. Not having them reimburse the village for things like the village attorney time. So there are different options. But but to me, where I see the bulk of the cost is really that architecture cost. That's where the biggest, you know, cost comes in, going out, getting an architect, engineer, and going through the process. And then the question becomes, do you want people coming before you with a sketch on a piece of paper, but without any real plans? Without seeing the site plan, without seeing the elevations? And I don't know of a great way to lower the costs any further than those elements. And Glenn, I don't know if you have any thoughts, but you know, that's kind of the cost problem. And that's just true with any application. Now, if you don't have a special use and you're just going through the building process, you have the architecture plans and building permit fees, and that's it. And the one benefit is you're not gonna spend a bunch of money and risk being turned down. And that's, you know, that's sometimes it's the element of, I don't wanna spend $4,000 on architecture, but come here and then it dies on the vine because you don't give approval.
I guess though, alternatively, we could have the anticipated petitioner come in just on a preliminary discussion.
Yes.
See what their thought process is.
Do a workshop.
Do a workshop, and then, you know, hopefully give them some guidance as to where we think we might land on this issue.
And that's something we can always encourage, and continue to encourage. The other is, if there are certain things that, even though it's a special use, that you find offensive, that you will not approve, or don't think you will, put those in the code so people aren't spinning wheels. One example, and I was thinking about it tonight when the applicant came before us and said, well, I could just propose this as an ADU. One of the things that we have not talked about yet, and I believe you had the same brainstorm, is should we allow it in the front yard? Because we aren't currently prohibiting it, and you know, but if that's something that you say, look, it's just, I've always pictured these in the backyard or a side yard, but not the front yard. If that's something you don't want to allow, put it in the code so somebody doesn't spend the money on the architecture plan to come here and say, this is too close to the street, why is it in the front yard, it looks weird, and then they have to go back to the drawing board, and then it'll, you know, if you put it in the code, it saves them that money. So, those are my thoughts.
Good thoughts. No, I think that's an excellent series of points. I think with respect to possibly cutting out the village board, and all deference to Aaron, I don't think I'd want to recommend that. I think this issue is just too critical that, you know, when the time comes, we'll make our recommendation, and then let the board opine, because I think it's just too critical, but certainly well taken, Ben.
I would agree with that. And one thought that I had, Ben's comments, is if we are trying to encourage these, at the very least to see how it goes for us during the special use process or a pilot program, then I think we should certainly consider maybe not charging some of those fees that Ben mentioned. You know, if we really want these to be built, then we can bear the burden of some of the attorney's fees, or lower the application fee, maybe even to zero, and maybe even reduce building permits. I think those are things that we can maintain in a special use, but still reduce the burden on the homeowner.
Well, why just, excuse me, Aaron, why can't we just make it a workshop? like we did tonight, and just, you know, it looks good, fine. If it doesn't look good, come to us formally. And make it, don't worry about, you know, the costs and stuff. If they're going against what we feel as a group, our ideas and thoughts, then they should pay to do it, because they're taking up our time, and we've already told them this is not a good idea. So I would propose, just, let's do the workshop first, keep it as a special use if we don't approve it as a workshop, something like that, and move on.
Well, I think to Aaron's point, if we do some of these cutting the cost, you know, maybe not have the application fee and maybe lower even building permits, then in a sense, are we incentivizing? Which I think is a good thing. You know, if this is indeed what we want, then why not do something to kind of incentivize it and make it not only easier, hopefully, but also less expensive and less risk? Because as, you know, we're saying, they can still come here and then we deny, and then they're out whatever amount of money, or we send them back for the second month and they incur more time, more architecture fees, and then we say no. So the more we can maybe not, we can't impact the architect's fees and certain things, but some of them I think we can control. Just my thought.
No, I think those are all excellent points. I think banning it or prohibiting it from the front yard, we might want to include that in our next draft.
Yep, I think we need to discuss that.
Couple other questions that I had deal with the square footage, and I know we were bouncing around over the last several months on square footage. There's a reference to 800 square feet, I think, and there's a reference to 1,500 square feet in the gross floor area for the CE Country Estate. As a group, are we comfortable with those numbers? And again, you know, we're operating in somewhat of a vacuum because, you know, at some point we'll have a public hearing on this.
Well, I think with Country Estate, I wouldn't want to be below 1,500. You know, I mean, they certainly can propose it, but 1,500 is not huge in Country Estates. So,
It says 800. I'm confused.
I know, I'm confused on where, because we kept shifting the numbers, but I know at one point we were 1,500,
than-
then I think we took it down.
That's other than Country Estates.
Okay.
Well, I think
Oh, yeah.
part of the discussion was when we were trying to decide between as of right and a special use. And if we were going to do as of right, we wanted to lower that threshold to a point that we were comfortable with. And if they wanted to build above and beyond that, then they could request a variance. So, in my opinion, I think 800 and 1,500 are totally appropriate even for a special use, because that's the expectation, right? We're setting expectations, and if somebody wants to go above and beyond them, then there will be a cost and a burden to, it'll be their burden of proof to show us that they should be able to do that. So I think 1,500 for Country Estate, I think that's fine. If they want to build bigger, then they can come and ask us to build bigger. And 800 for the residential and estate, I think is also quite appropriate.
Agreed.
Thank you, Aaron. Any other points of discussion from the commissioners?
So we're comfortable with these numbers for the bulk.
I think we're generally comfortable.
Okay, and we're comfortable with the height.
Correct.
So the only thing we want to really add in this would be parking. And there's something else.
Front,
Oh, no front yard.
yeah, that's correct here.
And then we seem to have a product, a completed product, hopefully. And then we discuss the special use. I suppose we have to do that once well, maybe we should discuss it now and come to just a conclusion, what we want to do.
Oh, I have one question also. Don't mean to interrupt. Maximum number of bedrooms? It should have no more than 2. I'm fine with that. I just want to clarify that's in here as we're talking about square footage, and, you know, possibilities of creative definitions of bedrooms or things like that.
My thought was that preliminarily, that was a reasonable approach. Certainly, again, the country estate might pose a separate, unique issue, but I think we'll cross that bridge when it's presented to us.
Okay.
And a lot, when it comes down to that sort of a parcel, will just be the visual impact on the streetscape in the neighborhood, I believe. But that's a very
So
good point.
just to ask then, regarding the, let's say the front yard piece, someone could still come requesting that as a special use in their front yard if that was the only place they had it or something like that, right? There's no reason why they couldn't request it?
That would be my understanding.
They can go through a variation process.
Right, okay, so we just add that layer,
Yeah.
right, okay.
So the only question comes in is this a special use, a streamlined special use, a workshop? How do we want to handle this going forward? And then we can maybe get a final product next time.
I love the idea of a workshop for anything really, especially anything that we haven't done before. Because some of the other projects that came before this board over the years and the village board just seemed like they were way off. And if they had participated in a workshop, then perhaps they'd have a little bit better idea of what we had in mind as a governing body. So I love the idea of a workshop, and if we can somehow require a workshop and then reduce particularly the financial burden for a special use, in my mind, that's the best way forward, at least initially. If we, down the line, we think that that going through the special use process is a bit burdensome to us as well as the homeowner, I think at that time we can make the change to a as of right.
Can we, at the workshop, determine if it should be special use or not? Is that legal?
Yes.
You make that
So-
decision then?
So you can certainly put a requirement in your code that says prior to submitting a complete application, you shall come before this body for a pre-application meeting, for a workshop meeting. Now, you can say that and say, at that meeting, you can waive the special use requirement.
We can waive it at that time.
You can waive it. My thought would be that the struggle with it then is, what is the binding document that we would have that would bind them to particular plans and a process, right? So you say, look, what you're doing looks great, we're all in favor of it, you don't need to come before us for a special use.
Unless there are some changes made.
But, okay. Then the question becomes, how detailed are those plans that they submit? Because if they're coming before you, the workshop, and it's on just a couple of sketches, it's really hard for Glenn to say, when they come for building permits, this is the exact same.
Okay.
Or you
I have
show.
bad architectural taste as it is, I assure you.
Right, but when it looks great, but but if it's not detailed and it doesn't show the trees that are gonna remain versus come down, or, or if there's not measurements, it's hard to determine, is this the same thing? And then it puts, I think, staff in a difficult position to say, is it substantially the same, is it not? And now, so I think that the way to do it, if your goal is to say, look, we want people, before they go out and spend a ton on architecture plans, hire attorneys, or whatever they're going to do, we would want them to come before us for the conversation that happened tonight to get the feedback. We can mandate that prior to submitting that special use application, they do a workshop. And then you can say, don't spend the money on the architect, this is dead on arrival on this lot, it's not going to work. And that's a service that I think you're doing for those applicants. Just to understand, it means one more meeting they have to come to.
That makes sense to me. Okay. Yeah.
Some of this is, Mr. Schuster got it right, one more meeting, how's that fit into the time frame, et cetera. Bear in mind, a workshop, and you can set it up how you want to. Typically, a workshop for better or for worse, doesn't come with public notice. You find out that if you are a subscriber to the Lake Bluff letter, which hopefully everyone in town is by now, but I can't guarantee you everyone reads it. So there's that.
But we
You
can
know, the-
require, like we did tonight, about,
Yeah.
he needs to check with his neighbors, make sure everybody is in agreement with changing the zoning. I mean, we can certainly suggest that at a workshop.
Good.
But I think, that sort of gets people off the hook of spending a lot of money up front. If, if we feel it's good, then, then they can, it's money well worth spent if they know it's gonna be an okay project to proceed with, in my mind. So we're kind of, both worlds are happening, I think, to me.
Well, and maybe if we just approach it also as a pilot, we'll kind of get a sense of, maybe we only have to do a few of these, and then we can,
You get a better idea.
right, and then see, we can maybe move it to a more uniform kind of thing. Is that possible, that we can then change gears pretty soon and say, okay, we don't, whatever we've learned, we can incorporate in.
At any point, this body has the ability to submit its own application for text amendments to your code.
Okay,
So if you've seen four people coming before you and say, we've learned a lot, here's how I tweak our ordinance, we will put on your agenda a text amendment, and then you can adopt it.
okay. I think that would be helpful.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So how many more meetings do we need for this?
I would hope that maybe we'll have a proposed finalized draft next month, and
then
then
go ahead
after
with the
that, we'll
public.
have a public hearing.
After that.
That's all reasonable, Fleck?
I think so.
Okay.
Because I think, and I don't want to speak for George, but I think the evolution of the discussion doesn't erode what George's comments have been over the last several months, so I think we'll be in pretty good shape. And then we just hope that the public comes out and expresses their opinions. Anything else on ADUs tonight?
Yeah, so just to recap, what we're hearing is, we'll go with this alternate B, so that's a special use as a detached unit. We skimmed over this, but I do want to emphasize that calls for a permitted use for an attached or an integrated unit. If you have a basement, if you build an addition, if you're talking part of the house, you're not going through this.
That's as long as, if they're not gonna add like a room to a house, does that become a B?
The way it's written right now, it would say if you're adding on to the house, if you're going in the basement, anything like that, you could do it as of right.
Okay, I guess adding on the house would be within their zoning.
Well, 100%
FAR anyway,
within
so it
both,
really is a
yeah.
moot point, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're in agreement on that. What I think we're hearing is that the special use permutation is the way at least we'd like to start. We'd like to send some recommendations about making that process very lightweight, about it being really a limited time pilot with the goal of continuing to reevaluate these things and so on. And the workshop idea, can we make it even simpler by having a workshop up front and by getting, looking at ways that we could waive or escape the full hearing process. Nothing in the front yard is easy. For through lots, bear in mind that means someone has to show a hardship to be really anywhere on the lot. You could have a garage on one street side, you wouldn't be able to have an ADU there. So bear in mind that on the consequence list. And we'll go ahead, and again, per your comments, we will add one stall of parking. My small caution would be, we did talk about this a bit in past iterations. Typically the pattern I see as I look out at the literature is people start with parking requirements and they get rid of them. Not in every case, but it's in one direction. You do have perhaps the unintended consequence of, you're encouraging people to build more impervious surface, whether or not they need it. In the surveys that have been done, on average, an ADU has less than one car. It's pretty close to one car. In all practicality, I think anyone building one in Lake Bluff will have room for that car, and so I don't think it hurts to require it. But just,
Okay.
As a requirement, a house with an ADU in Lake Bluff would have to show parking on the lot for 3 cars at that point. So understand that that's what you're asking for.
Should be a parking space for that ADU on the lot.
Yeah. But we can, that's cross out a 0, put in a 1, I think that's it. I do want to let you know, we didn't miss the comments on lot size. I'm happy to go into that, but that was in weighing that the special use option, we thought that wouldn't be as consequential anymore. I also know, didn't want to miss the visitability comments either. We can talk about that more if you like. I think it's difficult to pull off within some of the other limitations you have here, but certainly a very ripe topic for conversation in the worlds of ADU and elsewhere. You'll remember, if you remember our memos last year, remember that was another one of the strategies. It's something personally I've worked on for a very long time myself. Chicagoland is one of the first ordinances on the topic. It's neat stuff. Happy to bring that up at a different time if you guys like. I think we've got direction to work with if we didn't miss anything.
Are we missing anything with respect to the potential for the ADU in the existing structure? Again, I'm coming back to that unintended consequence.
I'd defer to the group on that.
I think as long as we're in the FAR, I don't know what else we would, shouldn't be there's no variance required if they're expanding their house within the acceptable area ratio. That's just doing an addition on the house.
Then are we missing something?
Well, so remember, the big difference between a attached ADU and just an addition is
Separate door.
separate entrance and kitchen facility, right, Glenn? That we,
Yeah.
that we say that you can't have multiple kitchen facilities in a house. So what they're really adding is, it looks like a typical addition, but usually with a kitchen and a separate entrance. So just as if somebody wanted to propose as of right, if they could fit it with the FAR and all, setbacks and all the other bulk requirements, they could put on as many rooms as they would want on the house. It's just here, instead of just adding bedrooms or living rooms or family rooms, your offices, what you're really adding is a doorway and a kitchen. So you could end up with on some of these lots, and this is something to think about, a substantial addition, but that could be done as well.
It's allowed.
It's allowed. So if it's something that you would all prefer to look at and evaluate, you
Should we
could
make-
certainly do it, but, you could build that, at least from a bulk perspective, you typically can build it as of right anyway.
I think I'd prefer, at least in the initial stages, to have the opportunity to review it.
Maybe we should do all ADUs should have a workshop.
Yeah, just to make sure we don't make a mistake.
I'm okay with that. It's not gonna cost anybody anything.
So workshop, but no special use?
No,
Or attached.
And so
So
what,
you didn't have to
and so with
declare
that-
that in the beginning, right? You don't have to declare, it could be a alternate or a special use if we did the workshop.
so you could say to somebody who wants to have an attached ADU prior to building, getting a building permit, you have to come before this body for a workshop. The difference is it would have no teeth. The special use allows you to say yes or no
Right.
and reject
Okay.
it, or put on conditions. You can do it, but, you're getting close to that property line, we want a row of hedges there for screening. If it's a workshop, they come forward with something and you go, I don't like this at all, please don't do it, or it'd be great if you put in screening.
No teeth.
There's no teeth to make it happen. So that's the big, now, if you just want a discussion and have a chance to review, you certainly can. But that's legally the distinction.
We've gone from no special use to
Now moving
to
forward.
all special use.
Never mind.
Yeah, I think my preference early on would be to incorporate that into the special use process,
At least until we get a
just-
better feel for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
I don't want all of a sudden one of our neighbors to have something happen to them that in retrospect might have been the wrong thing. Because once it's built,
It's a lot harder to take down.
yeah.
When do you label something a pilot program? Because, you know, we did that at the environmental for the bees and the chickens in town, and that was a pilot program that we allowed ourselves 6 months or whatever it was to, you know, try it and see if we had people and how it was doing. That might be a nice way of sort of launching this into the town, of saying it's a pilot program, special use with the workshop. Opportunity to come forward
So-
without the expense, you know? I mean,
So
we could-
some pilot programs, it's often not in zoning,
Okay.
and one of the reasons you call it that is because it has a sunset provision. So it'll say that you can have bees or chickens or, you know, all sorts of things, you know, if we wanted to do, you know, you can do it with anything you really wanted. We're gonna, for a 6-month period or a year period, do it, and then it will automatically expire unless we take action to formally say, we're happy with the pilot program, let's adopt it permanently in our code. So that's one way. From a zoning perspective, understand that once you allow somebody to build, there's no real sunset provision because their house is going to remain. What you could do is if you wanted a sunset, it won't affect those that have been built, but you could say this, you know, these provisions last for a year, and after a year, you cannot apply for a special use and not have an ADU unless it's extended by
Creates more work for
the
us.
village board, right, which you can always repeal it anyway. You can also just, in our PR, without a legal distinction, call it a pilot program,
Right.
saying we're continuing to study it, and that we, as a goal of this body, will in a year, let's put it on our agenda for discussion to check in where we're at. But then you can market it as a pilot program, it just doesn't have any real legal impact just because you called it as such. But that's an option, and then up to all of you, if you want to say in a year or whatever, how many months, let's revisit it and say what's working, what's not working. We've had no applications, why? What have we done that's too strict? Or we've seen the same 7 problems with every application, let's amend our code.
Which we would do anyway by having the special use permits.
I think, you know, a duration of at least a year is certainly reasonable. I don't think a period of time less than a year would give us the population that we need. But
Well,
a
and do we need the sunset? I mean, if this is something that we're trying to incentivize or encourage or whatever, I don't see necessarily needing a sunset. You know, I kind of like the informal, hey, it's a pilot, no legalese behind that, but, because otherwise, don't we have to do public hearing to extend and stuff? Because I think that's what happened with the short-term rentals, right? When it was going to expire, it became a public hearing again?
That's up to you. We could draft it in a way that doesn't require a public hearing to extend.
Okay,
But again, I mean, you get into all these different paginations, we can do it.
right.
It's just, you know,
Does
the
it have a
question is,
value?
what is what's the value of it? You know, so, you know, but again, if you think it's important to call it pilot from a marketing perspective, you know, you can certainly do that, that's up to you.
I will say too, something to think about here is, you know, what's the timeline by which you'll know what's going on. In prior policy discussions, you know, short-term rentals, backyard chickens, that was relatively short. Here, you know, 5 years, you know, the rate of change will be pretty slow here.
Right.
You know, if you had 5 ADUs in 5 years, you're doing all right, I would expect.
Right. I think that's good perspective.
Well, maybe we'll defer to Ben to do what's best for the village on that issue, like all issues. But,
We can just launch it, right? It doesn't have to be, I mean, pilot, I think, just lets people understand that we're a work in progress, kind of.
Right, we're looking at something new,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I'm certainly not opposed to a pilot. We'll get the ball rolling that way.
So we're gonna make everything a special use now? Everything will be B. Yeah.
I think that's what we're hearing, yeah.
Okay.
I guess.
And I will say this is mentioned in the memo and probably even a better check-in, but since our last check-in with the village board, many changes in faces, before your next meeting, either I or Drew Urban will be presenting to them on where you're at. We'll convey that we're looking at this in that special use framework now. We'll convey some of these policy decisions we're talking about. Many of those are within the purview of the village board when it comes to what the village charges for my time or for Ben's time. We'll have that information, that feedback when we come back to you.
Okay.
Excellent. Tremendous progress. Where we at? Agenda item number 6?
Yes.
Oh, public hearing, text amendment, irregular lot fronts and widths. Mr. Cole, if you want to give a brief overview?
Certainly. So this was on your agenda earlier in the year. This really comes from a conversation around the Shore Acres subdivision and a couple other instances we noticed at that time. If you look in the example plats that are attached to this, I like to hope they tell the whole story. Essentially, for some of these irregular or oddly shaped lots, we're putting in a couple rules of interpretation, codifying them in ways that just make the code behave more predictably. As a general rule, I would say that I think any code benefits from being simpler. I think our code in particular, I would love to make simpler. This adds complexity, which I tend to disfavor recommending to you. But again, I think it's the benefits outweigh the costs here. I think it leads to better outcomes. You'll remember that we were close to adopting this back before we skipped a couple meetings in the summer. There was a concern raised by Member Russell about some of the precise language we were using to define what is an irregular lot that falls into some of these rules. We've refined that language a bit. Specifically, his concern was, if you have a lot that's kind of rectangular on 3 sides, but the 4th side is curved with the street or is a diagonal or something like that, our prior definition would make that an irregular lot. This has a bit more nuance to keep that from happening, but again, to still sweep up these 3-sided lots, these flag lots, a lot of the unusual situations we see in town. So happy to answer any questions, or you have some, again, you're a recommending body in this situation. You have some draft motions on page 2 of your memorandum.
Yeah, any discussion from the commissioners? Any comment that you received from George?
I did not. We shared this with him. We had some conversations last week, and he received a copy of this Friday with the rest of the commission too. So,
Hearing no discussion, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve the text, the ordinance as stated in the packet.
Okay.
I'll
Is there-
second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, if we could have a vote, please.
certainly, Member Danley,
Aye.
Member Fisher,
Aye.
Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Russell is absent, Member Sorensen,
Aye.
Member Toll,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
It's the
Thank you.
quickest ordinance we ever passed.
Agenda item number 7, public hearing, text amendment, storage of goods and outdoor loading and storage in industrial districts.
Sure. So a bit of background here. We are in very unusual times with COVID. We are hearing really feedback from our business community, from our environs, as it were, that pulls us really in two opposite directions. On the one hand, we know that logistics uses are increasing in intensity in our area, that they're increasingly a reuse of property of this light industrial property, and that may not be as desirable for us. I can tell you that I believe Lincolnshire imposed a moratorium on these new uses recently.
And these are like Amazon or Walmart's type uses for storage and,
Yeah, all kinds of just warehousing, shipping, logistics type facilities. Those have been getting smaller. A few years ago, I would have said our industrial park doesn't make sense for that, and certainly I can tell you that our industrial park is going up in values in ways that make me think that's unlikely. I had a conversation with the Shields Township assessor today who said, before, I don't have my notes here, but, 4 or 5 years ago, the square foot range for that property was perhaps 50 or 60 to 75, and now it's closer to 75 to 100, which is a noticeable increase. But still, there's a lot of, these uses are expanding to our north. There's concern about them to the west. There are other inquiries we're aware of on the North Shore, and we wanted to bring that to you. Going in the completely opposite direction, we know that there's a lot of displaced businesses. Some rely more on outdoor storage. Many of the traditional manufacturers you would find in the light industrial district aren't tenants we expect to recapture. Some of the bigger new tenants we've seen in that area are Chevy Exchange expanding, our car dealerships expanding into the old Katarina Foods building. There's a very noticeable vacancy right now in the Liquid Controls building, which actually has some outdoor storage. And something we've heard closer to 41 is should we be more permissive of outdoor storage for businesses that really rely on that? That can be an eyesore. That hasn't historically been in the view of our business park, but can you screen them? Can you make that work effectively? Should you even engage in that? We thought we were close to bringing you some ideas. We wanted to take some more time, really go through perhaps some visual preference type work. I've asked Ms. Lennox to work on that over the next few weeks. We'll bring you in, perhaps if our agenda allows it, some work on that, some exercises on that on your September agenda to look at. In the meantime, no action to take tonight. We'd ask you to open and continue this hearing.
we might have to bring Mr. Badger back to serve as a consultant to give us a brief overview of trends.
I gave him a call on this very topic, actually, and I'll have to give him another one. So I'm sure he's very busy.
who's this? Who'd you say?
Sam Badger.
He'd be a wealth of knowledge on this issue. Any further discussion? It's very preliminary at this point, but I think it's going to be a very critical issue.
So we just make a recommendation to continue this in a future date.
Yep.
Okay,
Or motion, not a recommendation, just
it's a motion.
a motion.
All right,
to-
I make a
motion to
motion
continue.
to continue at a future date.
Second.
Well, we should do it to a specific date. So the motion has to be
There's
a,
always something to lawyer.
I know, it's to keep the,
Right here.
the notice alive, yeah.
I move to,
Yep,
when do you want the date?
September 22nd.
I move to continue this hearing to September 22nd at the next regular meeting of PCZBA.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none.
You can do this by voice vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No opposed, no opposition. Motion carries.
By saying the exact date, we save the village, I don't know, what, $100 of publication costs?
Yeah, $90.
Thank you.
And if we don't say the date, technically what happens is we lose the public notice. It goes away, and then we have to republish. But if we say the date,
That's a
and continue to a date specific, anybody who had notice tonight is informed, and I say air quotes because I know nobody's probably listening, but they're on record of having notice of the next hearing date, so we don't have to republish. It's, yeah,
Makes sense.
yep.
Okay. All right. Agenda item number 8, staff report.
Sure.
2020 census.
Yeah, so brief staff report. Our meeting next month, again, moved for the Jewish holidays, so it's slightly later. It'll be on September 22nd. Usually it's on the third Wednesday. The first is a Wednesday, so that's the fourth Wednesday. Again, about the same time of the month, but technically a rescheduled date for you. The first wave of data about the 2020 census came out late last week. I know I've asked Ms. Lennick to take a good look at it. Sam, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to share tonight. It's rougher than I thought. Go ahead.
No, I do have a report if I could share my screen.
Yeah.
Just a pretty brief overview of some 10-year changes based on demographics.
Should be able to do it.
Okay. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now. So I just viewed a few demographics. The first is the total population. I compared it with Lake County in the table as well as neighboring communities. And Lake Bluff's population has actually decreased within the past 10 years. And then going down to race and ethnicity. Now, this is a lot of data. Looking at the race, there is some decreases, and that could be just because of the decrease in the population within the past 10 years. And there's just a pretty slight increase or decrease in ethnicity as well. And lastly, looking at housing, now there is actually an increase in the total housing units within Lake Bluff, but there is a significant increase in vacant housing units as well in the community. And I have compared that on the chart below of neighboring communities just to see how they're doing. Now there is a pretty slight increase in housing within the neighboring communities. And looking at the last two charts, you can see the change within the occupied housing units as well as vacant housing units within the community and neighboring communities. And I'm happy to answer any questions about this data as well.
Okay. When will the data be finalized, Samantha?
It will be, according to the census, no later than September 30th.
Oh,
Do they give you a percentage of success within the community? Like, did 90% of the community respond to the census? Does that come out of this data at all?
I'm actually unaware of that, unless you are, Glenn. I know that there has been some talk that there was a lower response rate from the census this year compared to other years. But Glenn, if you have any knowledge on that, feel free to chime in, but I'm actually unsure.
Yeah, the best I can tell you, I'm not sure of a table that'll show response rate. Certainly it's not out yet. This is the most thorough the federal government ever is. So there's periodic estimates, but this is labeled as how accurate is it? I don't know, right? But this is labeled a 100% count in the data we have.
Okay.
So
Just curious.
Samantha, did they explain, or did they give a definition for what constitutes vacant housing? Because I'm surprised that we're so much higher than the other communities.
I believe it's just individuals who are not living in a housing unit. I'm not sure the technical definition, actually.
Okay.
that's one we'll have to get back to you on,
Okay.
unfortunately. Again, this is very much appreciate Sam taking a deep dive into this on short notice. This has been out on the street for less than a week. You're talking about it before the Illinois State Legislature, so.
No, appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I suppose I will make one more comment while we're on the topic of Miss Lennox. Sam, is your award still confidential?
No, it is not.
Oh, well, there you go. So I'm very happy to report and put Sam on the spot and say that, she's won, her and her group at UIC have won the Student Project Award from the state chapter of the American Planning Association.
Congratulations.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for the recognition.
So it'll be presented to her and her group at the State Planning Conference in October. It recognizes, I'll quote here, excellence in urban planning study that demonstrates the link between academia and practice. So it's, I'm sure Sam can talk more about it, but it's a study of food, water, electricity, and connectivity in Chicago's South Shore neighborhood. Highest award one of our interns has ever received. Very happy.
Oh, that's excellent.
Great.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is there
Just
anything?
for information purposes, I did just look up there is a definition for a vacant or occupied housing unit on the census website. So if there's more information desired on that, then it is available.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay.
Agenda item number 9, Commissioners
anything-
Report. Oh,
Cooking for next month, as you're aware of, other than ADUs and stuff?
Nothing I'm aware of.
Okay,
all
sorry.
right. Any further discussion this evening?
I have 3 items I'd like to bring up. One is, when somebody comes to us and it goes to the village and it gets passed, a zoning change or something that needs to be done, if, that's good for 1 year, correct? Am I understanding that?
Generally speaking, it's good for 1 year, and it can be extended administratively for up to an additional year. Not everything in the code works like that, but most things do.
I think we talked about this, but I just want to refresh my memory. Are we now sending out reminders at the end of that first year that people have not done their homework? Or
That's
not done their-
correct.
Okay.
Especially, I think it's good practice anyway, and something will continue, but especially right now in the age of COVID, you're seeing many people can't, aren't,
Right.
won't acting.
But we're giving them the benefit of the doubt and calling them or texting them. Okay, my next question is, from last month, we had a zoning discussion and the attendees did not show up. I would like to make a motion that we do not address any items here unless there's an attendance by the petitioner, whether it's video, Zoom, or in person. I don't think it's fair to us. And I know it was pretty simple last time, but there was some questions that came up, and I feel that should be standard operating procedure, that they show up or at least acknowledge the meeting. And I think it should be in our bylaws or guidelines or whatever we do.
Yeah, so we can certainly adopt rules. You have the authority to do that, and you can adopt a rule that states that this body shall continue all matters unless there's a representative in attendance.
Correct.
So
It's simple, but
You
they
can
should
do it
be.
that way, or you could make it, if you wanted, just practice and just make a motion. Anytime they're not here, one of you makes a motion and says, I hereby move to continue this to the next meeting, and then it's up to a majority of the body. So it's just a question for you of whether you want to codify it as a rule, or you just want to make it standard practice.
I'd like to codify it because we're all not going to be here 10 years from now, and I'd like this to be ongoing. I think it's rude that somebody takes our time, doesn't have the respect to show up and for any questions that we may have.
I don't disagree.
My last concern, and this is, I see it in my practice, what if, now that we're all masked, what if a petitioner comes in here and they don't have a mask? What are we to do? And this happens even in my office, where it's, and they have to purchase a mask from us, or they don't get seen. What's gonna be our philosophy? What's our policy gonna be? And it could happen. Especially if a bunch of people coming for a petition.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, as you know, the village requires masks for people coming in here. Certainly, to some extent, it's up to the chair's discretion, but I think, you know, thankfully, we haven't had a problem so far, but I will tell you, even, you know, in the last few days, we've had discussions about what would happen if there was a problem. So I hope you appreciate, I don't want to talk too much about that, you know, on camera and, you know, ask for a fight, but it's something that's on our minds.
Okay, because it's very important, in my mind.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think,
In one opportunity you have, if it does become an issue, if you feel uncomfortable, somebody comes in and refuses, you can always just say, I move to adjourn. Or I move for a recess, and then we strategize and figure out how we want to handle it. But you are not required to proceed at any meeting if you ever feel, whether it's COVID or if it's not COVID, if there's something going on where it's not civil, or there's a safety concern, there are ways to address it.
All right, that was my concerns.
excellent point, Elliot.
So on your second point, Elliot, are we going to have something at the next meeting to vote on to codify requiring petitioners to be present?
We can have that for you at your next
We
meeting.
can do that.
Discuss that more.
Yep, that's not a
Thank you,
problem.
All right, anything else tonight? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Very productive meeting.
Is this one yours?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I go to Chase too.